I came back after the Qingming festival and the factory's gone. This is tough.
It's huge. The Chinese economy is not doing well.
It has a big impact on workers' incomes this year. Jobs are not stable. It has a big impact.
I finished cleaning. My shift is over, and now I'm unemployed. Where can I find a job? There are no orders, and I don't even have money to live on.
US President Donald Trump has pushed the button, and the wheels are grinding to a halt in China. The trade war between the world's two largest economies has now reached an unprecedented threshold. Donald Trump's 145% tariffs on Chinese goods have not only strained diplomatic ties between the two countries, but also caused a serious break in China's production line. China's State Council responded by adjusting the tariff on US imports from 84% to 125%. But hundreds of thousands of products packed for the US are now stranded in warehouses in China. Unsold goods, idle machines, and empty order books. This silence is like the calm before the storm in China. The most critical dimension is manpower. Nearly 100 million Chinese workers face the threat of unemployment with the halt in exports. Factory closures have a knock-on effect on both China's domestic market and the global supply balance. Trump's tariffs are not just an economic policy. They are a direct blow to China's industrial pulse. So what will China do in this new chaotic equation? Will there be a winner in this trade war? Or will this war evolve into an all-consuming crisis? For answers to our questions and more, our video begins. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. Over time, China's economic dynamics have taken President Xi Jinping by surprise. Unemployment has reached 5.1%. Youth unemployment reached a record 21% in June 2023. For months, the authorities stopped reporting this number. Then, they revised the calculation method to more accurately reflect reality by not counting students who are still looking for part-time work while still studying. Last year, the youth unemployment rate rose to 16%. TikTok's Chinese sister site Douyin is full of complaints about the job market. Despite the complaints, Chinese officials say these statistics prove that the labour market is stabilising. China has set an urban unemployment rate target of 5.5% for 2025. But that doesn't seem to be how people feel on the ground. Chinese people are struggling just to put food on the table. This struggle is made more difficult by Donald Trump's latest tariff move. Some factories in South China have suspended operations since the beginning of April, as the American tariffs reached prohibitive levels. Thousands of small and medium-sized factories are going bankrupt, and there are no jobs left for the hundreds of millions of workers involved in exports. These workers are now looking for work everywhere. Even well-established companies like Sanhua and Angel have stopped hiring. About 100 workers are staying in hotels near the factory gates, waiting for Angel to start hiring. Even places like Shenzhou Dumplings, which once hired workers over 50, now want workers under 35. These factories can hire 10 workers, but 20 show up. Chinese officials and economists ignore this negative picture. They agree that the best way to boost the economy is to increase domestic consumer spending. China has a huge population of 1.4 billion, and in theory, this is a strong domestic market. Chinese politicians are therefore also trying to stimulate more growth in a stagnant economy by encouraging consumers to spend. Chinese leaders have vowed to take big steps to support consumers. In particular, they have taken some measures by providing subsidies for households to buy products mostly made in China, from rice cookers to electric cars. But it's not working. Chinese consumers are hesitant to spend more. Many of the middle class and the rich have lost money in the country's housing market crash. Apartment prices have fallen by as much as 40% since 2021. That's a wealth wipeout that surpasses the American housing market crisis nearly 2 decades ago. Chinese families often invest up to 80% of their savings in real estate for lack of other ways to build wealth. The country's stock market is small and speculative, while the bond market is mainly for institutional investors. Frugality is at the forefront of almost every spending decision of Chinese families, even in grocery shopping. In other words, Chinese citizens want to save money, not spend it. China is still an export-oriented economy. Last year, exports accounted for about half of the country's economic growth. At the same time, China remains the world's factory. Goldman Sachs estimates that 10 to 20 million people work in China on exports to the US alone. Some of the workers are already feeling the pain. A measure of job openings compiled by Paris-based QuantCube Technology, based on a dataset that tracks online postings from more than 2,000 companies, has fallen nearly 30% in the past 2 months from a year ago. An index of future hiring plans fell to a 6-month low in March. The employment submeasure of China's non-manufacturing purchasing managers index is also on the decline. The fourth quarter stimulus has not yet been reflected in the labour market. Companies want a more certain economic outlook before ramping up hiring. Chronic weakness in the job market is a major obstacle to the consumption stimulus campaign that the Chinese leadership has prioritised in its efforts to create a turnaround as it faces a protracted property crisis. Employment is under pressure from challenges both at home and abroad, according to Wang Xiaoping, Minister of Human Resources and Social Security. He spoke last month on the sidelines of the annual session of China's legislature, where a target of adding more than 12 million urban jobs in 2025 was set. Although China's economy, which ended last year with the fastest growth in 6 quarters, is set to strengthen further in early 2025, the struggle to make progress in employment has been seen as a major challenge. In addition to recent policy breakthroughs, a rebound in private business confidence has provided momentum. This has come in particular after domestic startup DeepSeek's breakthrough in artificial intelligence and President Xi Jinping's high-level meeting with entrepreneurs, including Jack Ma. Businesses' confidence in sales and financing rose in the first 3 months, with optimism the highest in nearly 2 years according to the indexes. The economy's strong performance in the first few months may have persuaded China's central bank to delay monetary easing so far this year. Authorities have yet to cut interest rates or reduce the amount of cash banks must hold in reserves, despite rising expectations over the past few months. Evidence has emerged of further green shoots in demand for heavy construction equipment. This reflects the government's front-loaded efforts to finance infrastructure projects with record bond sales. China's excavator sales rose 29% in March from a year earlier, the fastest growth since 2021. The government's net debt issuance rose to 1.5 trillion yuan in February, almost 3 times the amount it raised in the same month in 2024. Indicators compiled by QuantCube show that the contribution of exports to economic growth has remained stable since early April. Consumption has risen in recent weeks thanks to a rebound in housing-related spending. Alternative data provider QuantCube bases its estimates of economic growth on high-frequency statistics such as transportation figures, online shopping orders, and satellite data. The first quarter of 2025 continued the upward momentum seen across all sectors in the fourth quarter. Without a more optimistic outlook for employment, stimulating consumption will become even more daunting. To offset the shock of sweeping US tariffs, Beijing needs to boost domestic demand and help offset the loss of a market that absorbed $525 billion of Chinese goods last year. We estimate that a halt in China's shipments to the US would put 3% of its gross domestic product at risk. Goldman Sachs, which is among the global banks that have cut their forecast for China's GDP growth, predicts growth will slow to 4% in 2025 from 5% previously. The US announced exempting computers and other electronic products from its so-called reciprocal tariffs. This may provide some relief for Chinese exporters, as the exemption covers more than $101 billion worth of goods from the country. Still, expectations are growing that Chinese policymakers will introduce more stimulus to help the economy reach its official growth target of around 5% this year. While the authorities have signalled a shift towards boosting consumption this year, the measures enacted so far remain limited. As a result, confidence among households has not yet turned a corner. Surveys show consumer confidence weakening in early 2025 compared to last year. The combination of extremely high US tariffs, sharply reduced exports to the US, and a slowing global economy is expected to put significant pressures on the Chinese economy and labour market. The tariffs will undoubtedly have severe consequences for China's export-oriented manufacturers, especially those in coastal regions that produce furniture, clothing, toys, and household appliances for American consumers. But since Trump first raised tariffs against China in 2018, a number of key economic factors have dramatically changed Beijing's calculations. Importantly, the importance of the US market for China's export-oriented economy has declined significantly. In 2018, at the start of the first trade war, outbound exports to the US accounted for 19.8% of China's total exports. By 2023, this figure had fallen to 12.8%. Tariffs could further encourage China to accelerate its strategy of domestic demand expansion, freeing up the spending power of its consumers and strengthening its domestic economy. And although China entered the 2018 trade war in a phase of strong economic growth, the current situation is quite different. Stagnant real estate markets, capital flight, and Western disengagement have pushed the Chinese economy into a period of permanent slowdown. Perhaps counterintuitively, this prolonged downturn may have made the Chinese economy more resilient to shocks. It has pushed businesses and policymakers to reckon with the harsh economic realities that existed even before the impact of Trump's tariffs. Trump's tariff policy against China could give Beijing an external scapegoat, allowing it to mobilize public sentiment and blame the economic slowdown on US aggression. China also understands that the US cannot easily change its dependence on Chinese goods, especially through supply chains. While direct US imports from China are declining, many goods imported from third countries still rely on Chinese-made components or raw materials. By 2022, the US was dependent on China in 532 key product categories. This is almost 4 times the level in 2000. Over the same period, China's dependence on US products has halved. There is a relevant public calculation. Increased tariffs are expected to raise prices, which could create discontent among American consumers, especially blue-collar voters. Indeed, Beijing believes that Trump's tariffs risk pushing the previously strong US economy into recession. In addition to the changing economic environment, China has a number of strategic tools to retaliate against the United States. By some estimates, China dominates the global rare earth supply chain critical to the military and high-tech industries, supplying about 72% of US rare earth imports. China placed 15 American entities on its export control list on March 4th and then added 12 more on April 9th. Many were US defense contractors or high-tech firms that depend on rare earths for their products. China also retains the ability to target key US agricultural export sectors such as poultry and soybeans. These sectors are heavily dependent on Chinese demand and are concentrated in Republican-leaning states. China accounts for about half of US soybean exports and almost 10% of American poultry exports. Beijing cancelled import approvals for 3 major US soybean exporters on March 4th. On the technology side, many US companies such as Apple and Tesla remain deeply dependent on Chinese production. The tariffs threaten to significantly squeeze profit margins, which Beijing believes could be used as a source of leverage against the Trump administration. Beijing is reportedly planning to respond through regulatory pressure on US companies already operating in China. On the other hand, the fact that US trade advisor Peter Navarro and Elon Musk, a prominent Trump opponent of tariffs, have significant business interests in China is a powerful wedge Beijing can use to divide the Trump administration. While Beijing believes it can counter Trump's sweeping tariffs on a bilateral basis, it also believes that the US attack on its trading partners creates a strategic opportunity to dislodge American hegemony. In our immediate neighbourhood, this shift could significantly reshape the geopolitical landscape of East Asia. After Trump first raised tariffs on Beijing on March 30th, China, Japan and South Korea hosted their first economic dialogue in 5 years and pledged to advance a trilateral free trade agreement. The move was particularly noteworthy given how carefully the US worked during the Biden administration to cultivate its Japanese and South Korean allies as part of its strategy to counter China's regional influence. From Beijing's perspective, Trump's actions present an opportunity to directly erode US influence in the Indo-Pacific. Similarly, Trump's steep tariffs on Southeast Asian countries were a key strategic regional priority during the Biden administration. It could bring these countries closer to China. Chinese state media announced on April 11th that President Xi Jinping will pay official visits to Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia from April 14-18, aiming to deepen all-round cooperation with neighbouring countries. Notably, all three Southeast Asian countries have been targeted by the Trump administration with reciprocal tariffs that have now been halted. Tariffs of 49% were imposed on Cambodian goods, 46% on Vietnamese exports, and 24% on products from Malaysia. Far away from China lies an even more promising strategic opportunity. Trump's tariff strategy has prompted officials in China and the European Union to consider strengthening their own previously strained trade ties. This could weaken the transatlantic alliance, which is struggling to disengage from China. On April 8th, the European Commission President held a phone call with the Chinese Premier, during which both sides jointly condemned US trade protectionism and advocated free and open trade. Coincidentally, on April 9th, the same day that China raised tariffs on US goods to 84%, the EU announced its first wave of retaliatory measures. It imposed a 25% tariff on selected US imports worth over €20 billion. But the implementation was postponed after Trump's 90-day pause. Now, EU and Chinese officials are holding talks on existing trade barriers and are considering holding a comprehensive summit in China in July. Finally, China sees in Trump's tariff policy a potential weakening of the international position of the US dollar. Widespread tariffs imposed on multiple countries have shaken investor confidence in the US economy and contributed to the dollar's decline in value. Traditionally, the dollar and US Treasuries have been seen as safe haven assets, but recent market turmoil has cast doubt on this status. At the same time, the high tariffs have raised concerns about the health of the US economy and the sustainability of its debt, undermining confidence in both the dollar and US Treasuries. While Trump's tariffs have struck at the heart of the Chinese economy, Beijing still has powerful leverage. From technological restrictions to supply chains, from investment restrictions to strategic resources, China has the potential for a wide range of countermoves, and this time it may not just be on the defensive. But in the shadow of all these geopolitical moves, it is the ordinary citizen who suffers. Millions of Chinese are struggling to survive on a daily basis, facing the risk of unemployment as exports stop and factories close. Trump's trade war may be a strategic chess move, but the biggest loser on the board is the people. Thank you for watching.